Thanks very much, Bart, for the invitation to speak, and hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay there, Bart?
Yes, indeed.
Okie doke. So as Bart said, I am an ecologist and a sustainability scientist. I grew up and I still live out here in the mountains of Western Maryland. And my spirituality is pretty eclectic. I borrow from many traditions, including several earth-based spiritual traditions. And I'll talk about that some. And Bart has told me some about your group and Citizens Climate Lobby. I know just a little bit. I've read up on the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and that sounds really excellent and hopeful and effective to me. It's something I plan to support. I'm going to talk about the climate crisis from what may be an alternative approach to addressing it. I'm also going to talk about how my spirituality informs my science and vice versa. And then after that, I'm going to try to keep it to about 10 minutes. I'm really interested to share discussions and learn more about your group and your work and spirituality. So to start talking about climate crisis and my approach, I co-authored a book with Brian Fath in 2018. It's called Foundations for Sustainability. And I'd be happy to tell you more about that book. But just the bottom line, the punchline of the book, our hypothesis that we came to, it's kind of a culmination of each about 25 years of work in environmental science. And we propose that the root cause of the global ecological crisis is actually the conventional paradigm of science. And that from there, we see science driving industrial culture, and those two causing the global ecological crisis. And so the solution that we put forward and have been trying to promote and get help to refine is that a new paradigm of science that is holistic and focused on serving life would be the way to solve the global ecological crisis. So I'm going to talk about that, but mostly from the angle of trying to understand how it could help with working on climate disruption. So that's where, Bart, if you could show that first slide, that would be great. So this is obviously an oversimplified diagram of the much more complex work related to climate action, but I'm using it just as a way to get things started. And this approach to focus on reducing CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, like some of what I read about Citizens Climate Lobby, a direct approach. It's an excellent approach, and I'm not suggesting anyone should stop with this kind of direct approach. I think it's totally necessary. But Brian Fath and I, we're systems ecologists, and we kind of wanted to zoom out and look at a bigger picture and to understand the context in which this climate crisis is happening. And when you imagine zooming out, you could think of the many things that are connected to climate disruption, like our dependence on fossil fuels, or how the nitrogen cycle is being disrupted from agricultural fertilizers. And then if you keep doing that zoom out thing, and if you could show the next slide, Bart, this is kind of what we get to when we think of the global ecological crisis. And we kind of array these 11 symptoms here around the outside, each of which, or many of which, is a full-blown crisis in its own right. And we have started wondering, again, like having worked in this field for 25 years each, can we really tackle this in one or two or three problems at a time? And is there some kind of shared root cause that's driving all of these symptoms? So that's how we depict the global ecological crisis, and we've been focusing on trying to understand this crisis as a systemic whole. And the fairly simplified distillation of this crisis is think of it as a dysfunctional relationship in which humans are damaging our own life support, our home, and ourselves, not to mention causing harm to other species. Um, and then, so I've just recently, for this talk, actually came up with the next slide, if you could show that one, Bart, where I converted that sort of bullseye diagram of concentric rings to this cone or a tree. And the root of the tree down at the bottom is what we're wondering and starting to ask if there's some kind of fundamental context from which all of these problems are arising. And again, you know, the thing they share is that they're all examples of how we're damaging the essential life of the planet. So our work is at the bottom, and it's the paradigm shift approach to focus on the deep roots out of which all of these crises grow, including the climate crisis. This approach might think that it's going to take longer to bear fruit, but the potential is that it could change the context entirely. If it would work, then we'd have a new kind of science driving a new kind of technology and culture, and which altogether would bear fruits such the environment improves over time. It would be a 180-degree change. Then all of the surface symptoms would be solved and environmental quality and sustainability would be maintained going forward. If this worked, it would solve the climate crisis, and it should do so in a very long-lasting way. I said new kind of science, technology, and culture, but in many ways it won't be new at all. Indigenous knowledge and indigenous cultures have already solved the root problem at the global ecological crisis, but we kind of have to do it, extend that to industrial culture. So just to describe this a little bit more, if you look at number 1 there on the bottom, that's where we focus the paradigm of conventional science. And on the right-hand side, we talk in the book about how there are 2 major flaws that are foundational ideas in the current dominant paradigm. The first is to split life from environment and treat life and environment as separate and different. And the second basic idea is to equate life with an organism, pretty much only, and then to equate both life and organism with a mechanism. So one of the ways the conventional science paradigm gets described is as mechanistic science. The next thing can happen after the paradigm is that it influences our values and culture. And so what the next thing that happens is that the value of the environment is seen as less than the value of life. And the main thing to note there is that if you keep life and environment unified, as we do in the paradigm we propose, then it's not possible for the environment to have lesser value. The second thing that happens is that the technology that grows out of the science is based on machines. And machines are entropy producing, and by necessity, they degrade the environment as they operate. This is required by law, the second law of thermodynamics. And then finally at point 3 there, what arises from the science paradigm is that we come to view environmental degradation as normal and unavoidable. And so thinking that way and living that way, it becomes sort of automatic to make millions and billions of everyday choices and decisions and actions which degrade the environment in all these varieties of ways that we see. This status quo or business as usual is founded on our most basic assumptions of how the world works. So that's the story we put forward in the book for how to solve the climate crisis at its root. It also hinges on evidence that ecosystems and life as a whole operate naturally in ways that improve the environment over time. This is how we have an oxygen atmosphere. This is why soils naturally grow in depth and increase in fertility. Degrading the environment is not necessary. It's not normal, just the opposite. life behaves the opposite of a mechanism. Life improves its environment over time. So that's the concept, and we back it up in the book with lots of scientific evidence from ecosystems, and we cite corroborating work from many other scientists. The last comments are how my eclectic spiritual studies and practices linked to this, through Buddhism. The ideas there about how our minds and the ideas that we attach to are the source of suffering. That's linked to this idea of an outdated science paradigm causing suffering. Also, through Buddhism, when I meditate and focus on my breath, one of the main things that becomes in my awareness is my connection to plants. So every single aspect of every single second of my existence is connected to plants. It's our ecosystemic life, our biospheric life. And then Gaianism, to me, is related to the ecological self of Arnie Ness. And he wrote about the ecological self and how if you think that way, then care flows naturally, and our behavior naturally and beautifully follows strict norms of environmental ethics. So that's how I see my work. It's as a part of Gaia, serving life and serving Gaia and trying to change science to help with that. And I'll stop there and look forward to discussion and questions.